First of what I guess we're going to call the Puerto Rico sessions. You're learning about life in the Spanish American colonies from 1500 to 1750. If you are the sort of person who titles each one of these slideshows, which I hope you are since they are all broken up by topic, you do need to know that you do have to put Spanish America. There are some other Spanish colonies that we're going to talk about through the course of this course, but this one is targeted primarily in Spanish America. And you may be wondering, where is that? Well, I'll tell you in a second, because first we're going to look at our AP learning objectives. Ha! Pulled a trick on you that I totally didn't do by accident. Um, You'll notice there's a lot of learning objectives focusing on state building, the economy, looking at systems of slavery or forced labor, lots of stuff. We're basically looking at all of those spice tea or septic attributes, and you don't need to get too caught up or worried in writing all these down, as is usually the case, because again, this is material that is familiar to you. This is stuff you've learned before. We're just going a little bit deeper than your previous courses have. So let's look at the where next. All right. So what you're looking at here is a map of everything that the Spanish claimed to own during this time period. Now, it is important to remember that while they claimed everything you see in red and orange, in actuality, what they controlled, let me grab my marker here, what they controlled was more or less what I am circling. That's certainly going to be our point of focus. They did establish some missions in what is now California. That's why all of the major cities of California that you've ever heard of have Spanish sounding names: San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, Oakland. Okay, that last one's not, but still. But they didn't really do a whole lot north of what is now Mexico, and that's because the profit, you can even go ahead and write this down, the profit, the important bits, that was down in Meso and South America, because you'll hopefully remember, that was where the civilizations were. That was where the settled societies were. North of the Rio Grande, in what we now call the United States and Canada, there weren't settled societies, so if we're going to rip the Band-Aid clean off, there weren't nearly as many interesting things to exploit up there. Let's actually go and look at a brief rundown. Okay, so we're going to do this basic info breakdown on all of the colonial empires. This is, of course, the one for the Spanish. You're going to see one for the French, British, and Dutch tomorrow if everything goes according to plan. So your location, and I know some of you already wrote this down, but your location is pretty much all of South America that's not Brazil, all of Mesoamerica, and a whole lot of islands in the Caribbean, including the one that I'm currently on. The economic basis for the Spanish colonies is pretty wide ranging, but the general rule is on the mainland, it's going to be focused mostly on gold and silver mining, and on the Caribbean colonies, it's going to be focused primarily on sugar. You're going to see sugar on a lot of these, fair warning. The relationship with the natives. And it is rare that I want you to write what I put verbatim, but this is important to understanding things. The Spanish relationship with Native Americans is atrocious. It is very, very, very difficult for me to tell you just how bad it was. I'm going to try, but I'm probably not going to succeed. It's actually called the Black Legend by other historians. And the reason for that is, as we discussed in a previous class in my classroom, Spain was uniquely ill-suited to meet new people. We are talking about a society that was overtly opposed to anybody that wasn't like them. They were anti any other religion. They were anti any other race. They were very openly nakedly hostile to other people. And I know I've told you that a lot, but I cannot stop repeating that. It explains so much about what comes next. And indeed, the bottom two bullets pretty much address that. Now, there is one critical difference between Spanish America and the other European colonies, and that is that a lot of the labor done in Spanish America was done by natives, especially in Mexico and in the South American and Central American holdings. In the Caribbean, Spain was much more a traditional patterned empire that had big sugar plantations, farming sugar, using African slaves. But on the mainland, you had so many Native Americans being used for farming and for mining and dying not only of disease but of these utterly awful conditions. Just the Spanish colonies are bad, y'all. Okay. Which brings us to the Spanish labor systems. You have the encomienda and repartimiento systems. Um, those are both vocabulary words. Encomienda is going to be familiar to those of you who took a push, and that is where the Spaniards are pretty much given an allotted number of natives who they can treat pretty much however they want, so long as they provide them with protection, put in sarcasm quotes over here for your convenience. And so that they can educate those guys about Christianity. Officially, natives were free. Officially, Native Americans were not slaves. But, I mean, heck, look at the image on the right-hand side of your screen, which is actually a Aztec drawn, but in a Spanish codex about the Aztecs, demonstrating how people in the encomienda were treated. The encomienda was a form of virtual slavery. If you remember serfdom from way back when we talked about medieval Europe, you're pretty much talking about serfdom, but with racism and violence. So, yay, history. Um, in 1542, so you'll notice, quite literally 50 years after the discovery of the Americas, the Spanish crown was like, wow, the natives are being treated really badly. We should get rid of this system. And they ban the encomienda system and they replace it with the repartimiento system. And repartimiento pretty much made any colonial land that hadn't specifically been claimed by a landowner the property of the crown. And what they would do is they would tell natives, okay, this land is the property of the Spanish Empire. You're going to work this land for 2 weeks, 2 months out of the year, basically as your way of paying tax, as your way of paying tribute. And if there's alarm bells going off in your head saying, wait a minute, that sounds an awful lot like the Inca Mita system, good job. That's a great comparison to make, and you're well on your way to a 5. Anyhow, there's a historical school of thought that the banning of the encomienda and the subsequent usage of the repartimiento was an early baby step on the road to banning slavery. That's a bit too much because the repartimiento was still forced labor. It was still demanded labor, but it was better than the encomienda, which again, pretty much just slavery and abuse of the natives. On to happier things. I'm just kidding. This isn't actually all that happy. But under these systems, a distinct racial hierarchy develops in the Spanish colonies. At the top, you have peninsulares, people who are born in Spain, that is, the Iberian Peninsula. The peninsulares were obviously two Spanish parents, born in Spain, moved to the colonies. They did not see themselves as residents of the colonies, but they saw themselves as members of the Spanish Empire. They were distant enough from Spain to warrant self-government, but a lot of times these people are inheriting their land from previous landowners who had moved to or lived in the colonies, and quite frankly, the peninsulares were not seen all that commonly in the society where they were theoretically on top, because again, you had to be born in the Iberian Peninsula and move there, and it's the 1500s. That's not a cheap or easy trip to make more than a couple of times. Right underneath them is a much larger class, the criollos or Creoles. The Creoles are people who had two white parents. Their parents may have been Peninsulares, their parents may have been other Creoles, but they were ethnically white, ethnically Caucasian, whatever you want to talk about. Yeah, I'm talking about race on the internet. This is real fun. Um, but the bottom line is the Creoles were the colonial upper crust. They were born in the Americas. The distinction between these two white groups is where you were born. Peninsulares, born in Spain, are above Creoles, born in the Americas. And these guys disliked the Peninsulares because the Peninsulares looked down on them, and they also liked the other people. They also disliked, I should say, the other colonials because they looked down on the other colonials because they were mixed race people. The Spanish colonies, ladies and gentlemen. Further on down the caste ladder, underneath the two main white castes, were the first really, really large caste of people, the mestizos. And the mestizos are people of mixed native and Spanish ancestry. They were seen by the whites, by both peninsulares and criollos, as lesser people. They started out as a low middle class. That's what this says here. But remember, we're talking about a large period of time in this presentation. So eventually you could cross out the word low, but they were still at best a middle class. Now, owing to their very, very, very large numbers, they are going to form this class of people that is not ruling, but nowhere near the bottom. And at the bottom, of course, you have pure-blooded natives who had survived the horrors of the 1500s, as well as African slaves, especially in the sugar plantations and later on in the mines as well. I want to draw your attention to this painting over here on the right, though, and this is big. I need you to pay attention to this. Okay, so this looks like a fun family outing, right? Whenever I'm teaching this in class, I always ask, so this painting looks adorable. You have a white father, Native American mother, and their mixed race child frolicking. It appears to be nothing more than a nice little image. This painting is secretly horrifying, very sneakily so. If you look down at the bottom, right here, you'll notice writing. And the reason there is writing is because this is not a family portrait. This is a racial identification guide called a Casta painting, letting you know what to call people when you see them in colonial Spain. And when I say these things are elaborate, this is the most basic one. White guy, Native American woman, which was usually the permutation for reasons we'll get to in a second, equals one mestizo. Now, you may be thinking, but McDowell, that can't possibly be the only possible racial permutation. You're right. So in case you thought I was cherry picking that, you will notice these are Casta paintings, two separate ones from a couple hundred years apart, depicting all of the various permutations of racial mixing in the Spanish colonies. You have this wide rainbow of people. By the time the Spanish colonies are going to start to seek their independence, there are very few pure-blooded people of any race. Black, native, white Spanish, there are very few of them left. Everybody's been mixed with someone, and these are elaborate. Like, if you guys were curious, okay, what happens if we have a Native American person who marries a mestizo? What is their child called? There was a term for that. These things really did go through in a distressingly elaborate way how to racially identify people. We'll move on. Okay, so Spanish colonization was not exclusively male, but very, very heavily male. And as a result, Spanish women who did move to the colonies, or women who were born as Creoles in the colonies, actually had a pretty good amount of autonomy, a pretty good amount of choice when it came to selecting a husband. However, because they were small in number, the vast majority of Spanish men because women were small in number, I should say, the vast majority of Spanish men actually married Native American women at way higher rates than you would see anywhere else in the European colonies, far higher than the English or French or Dutch would. In fact, if you look over here, we have one of the earliest depictions of Spanish colonization. This is Hernan Cortez on the left, who conquered the Aztecs, and on the right, whispering into his ear, is his interpreter, Malinche, who he actually fathered a couple of children by, despite the fact that he had a wife back in Spain. Cortez wasn't a nice person. Spanish men married native women, which is what made that mestizo class so large. Now, in the early days of Spanish colonization, marriage would often be done by these ranking Spaniards, the leaders of these expeditions, to cement alliances or to ensure the positive treatment of a tribe. A lot of, for example, early Spaniards with Cortez married the Tlaxcala women specifically so they would have the Tlaxcala as allies against the Aztecs. Lower down, though, because I have to bum you out, lower down, Native American women are subject to the usual conquering cocktail of violence, abuse, and rape by colonizers. Get used to that. You're going to hear me saying that again. Sorry. Okay, we're going to go through these last couple pretty quickly. I know this has gone kind of long. Hopefully it's been interesting. I really enjoy this sort of lesson. It's not happy, but it is at the very least engaging. So Spanish colonies were designed for profit first, last, and always. As a result, the environment is devastated in the Spanish colonies. Forests are clear-cut, swamps and lakes are drained. Even the lake that Tenochtitlan was built on was drained to build new sites to grow cash crops. You do have to include cash crops in your notes. They were not growing necessary things. They were growing things for money. South America also sees a huge development of industrial scale mining of silver and gold. We're going to look at this mine that this is a picture of on the right hand side here. We're going to look at this mine a little bit later in this unit. And it is important to remember that mining is a devastating thing to the environment. Here's the big one. Almost no thought was given to sustainability, long-term impact, or the natives, unless you think, well, that's just McDowell projecting 2019 values onto the 1500s. It is not. The Europeans treated their own fields with sustainability, rotating their crops so they didn't dry out the fields. They didn't do that early on in the Americas. The goal was extraction. Money, money, money. And the result was pretty devastating to the environment of Central and South America, as well as the Caribbean. With regards to religion, Spanish priests would seek to convert natives to Catholicism. Some of the readings you guys are doing in class focus on that. And your Spanish priests basically came in two flavors. There were a lot of them, guys, who are really good people who legitimately wanted to see Native Americans convert to Catholicism because they believed they were saving their souls. And there are also Spanish priests who believe the natives are heathens, and if they don't want to convert, then we'll just light them on fire and send them to hell. It quite literally did depend on who you're talking about. Sometimes priests are able to convert these people willingly. Sometimes it's violent. You see very infamously one Spanish priest lit countless Maya artifacts on fire to try to convince large numbers of Mayans to convert in the Yucatan. Other than that, the big thing to know is this is a great example of syncretic religion. Priests in the far-flung corners of the Spanish Empire would convert natives, oftentimes by folding Christian beliefs into native ones. On the left, we have a picture of Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. That is very, very Aztec, if you hadn't noticed. But the people who celebrate today are almost exclusively Catholic. On the right, we have the Lady of Guadalupe. Same thing, a vision of a distinctively Catholic figure, the Virgin Mary, but with a lot of Aztec flavoring in the art style that she's drawn with, as well as in the things she said and supposedly did. We also see, if you've ever heard of Santeria, which I do not practice, I don't have any crystal ball, None of you got that reference. But the religion of Santeria is also a hybridized religion. Catholicism, but focused very heavily on saints, specifically native ones. It's syncretism. It's a great word to know. I'll underline it. And it is also something that the AP test loves to ask about. So you need to know syncretic religion, blending Catholicism with natives. Very last one, innovation and technology. Again, when you're looking to profit, you're not going to produce a whole lot of new stuff. So very little intellectual stuff is going to come out of Spanish America. You do see some priests interview natives. What few Aztec codices survive were actually put down primarily by priests employing and interviewing Aztec artists, writers, and such. But for the most part, Spain was seeking profit. Sometimes they even actively destroyed Native American art and intellectual achievements. Architecturally, and we are going to end, I know we're at the 20-minute mark, I apologize. Architecturally, the Spanish build these huge fortifications, the goal being to defend their new empire, and also they build cathedrals to show off the awesomeness of Catholicism. These forts, which are often built, for example, El Morro here in beautiful Puerto Rico, built on the edge of the island specifically to blow enemy ships out of the water, protect the harbor, and therefore protect the precious colony and its precious profit. Thank you guys so much for being along for the ride. Tomorrow will be kind of a lightning round of the French, English, and Dutch colonies. It shouldn't take as long, but you have to understand the Spanish colonies, guys. They're the bedrock. They're going to be used as the excuse for a lot of the abuse of natives in the other major colonial powers because pretty much, hey, we're not as bad as the Spanish. So yeah, let's do this again tomorrow. Hope you're having a great day. Hope that the primary sources weren't too overwhelming for you, and we'll see you then. Send a message on Remind if you need anything, and like I said, should be doing a Zoom review. Keep your eyes on the Remind for that.